The good news is, though, Gab Marcotti, the podcast, is joining us right now. And we have a lot to discuss when it comes to this man's former team, Newcastle, Gab, because there's been a lot of goings-on at the club over this summer. Tell us a little bit more about where we're at with Newcastle United and what's been going on so far.
Well, it depends where you want to start. Obviously, Paul Mitchell's come in, who's going to replace Dan Ashworth as director of football. Highly respected, big CV, Southampton, Spurs, the Red Bull Group, Monaco. Exactly, kind of really one of those people. I'm actually kind of surprised he didn't get a job earlier, to be perfectly honest. There's a new chief executive in town. I mean, he's been there a while now, but this is the first summer where he's really making his moves. Darren Eales, who of course was previously in MLS at Atlanta United, I believe, and certainly what they've said at the top. Eddie Howe's going nowhere. Obviously, he's been linked to the England job.
Yes, and obviously that's something we want to talk about as well. Is that a concern for Newcastle, that Eddie Howe may have his head turned by the England job? Obviously, things have gone very well for him at Newcastle, but with no European football right now, could he have his head turned, do you think? Has that been talked about, Gab, over in England?
I mean, he seems to be one of the names that gets thrown out there as a possible successor to Southgate, which, look, is inevitable. If you're English and you're doing well, you will get linked to the job. And let's face it, it's a small pool of English managers right now who are actually considered good. Obviously, Graham Potter is another name that's kind of come up time and again. He's unemployed, so he's available. I think from Newcastle's perspective, I think they made peace with losing Ashworth, but they definitely want to hang on to Eddie Howe. Might he be tempted? Look, in the end, the England job is the England job, and there's a World Cup coming up in 2 years. And I think the reality is, while the Newcastle project is certainly excited, and it's certainly a very big club, I think if you're Eddie Howe, you at least want to hear what England and the FA might have to say, especially because, as we've discovered from Newcastle, all those people who thought, oh, here comes Newcastle, the Saudis, they're going to spend left, right, and center, and they're going to buy this guy and that guy. Actually, that's not what they've done. I mean, they obviously have spent on the squad, but I think they've been very disciplined thus far. They've been careful not to avoid profit and sustainability rules, and as a result, this is not a squad that's kind of been assembled Panini sticker wise, right? They've tried to have to be clever in the way they've operated thus far. So that might be a factor that Eddie Howe might want to consider. This team's not going to become Man City or Abramovich's Chelsea overnight.
Would you be worried if Eddie Howe were to leave Newcastle, Shaka?
No. I think Newcastle certainly have the foundations to continue to grow as a football club. Managers move on. And the truth is, listen, from an Eddie Howe perspective, there aren't many opportunities that England come knocking. I know we are a long way away from appointing Eddie Howe. There's still this speculation, but let's assume that the FA did. That doesn't happen every day. And as a manager, as an English manager, you understand Eddie Howe's interest in it. And if they did, if he'd leave Newcastle. At the same time, during the course of last season, while it certainly was an injury-hit season, questions were starting to be asked of Eddie Howe, particularly towards the back end of the season when a lot of those players started to come back. Yes and no, there were some key absentees, Pope in particular, but for the most part, they finished the season just about fit. And there was no real or no significant uptick in results from the previous season. And while I continue to defend Eddie Howe and believe in him as a manager, I just feel that some of that equity that he'd built up over the previous 2 seasons had started to be spent. So coming into this season, I think eyes certainly would have been on the start that Newcastle made. You couldn't afford to kind of repeat the form of last season. So if he goes, good luck to him. But at the same time, there's no doubt in my mind that Newcastle United, because of who they are as a football club, and Gab's right in pointing to the ownership and the fact that they aren't just throwing cash at every single problem, but they can bring in a manager to succeed Eddie Howe and continue to have the club competing at every level. And
they'll be wanting to better on last season's 7th place finish, Stevie.
Yeah, absolutely, and I expect them to, because they're not in Europe. But I've actually changed my mind from last week.
You had quite a lot to say about it as well.
Well, last week I thought, well, the question that Eddie Howe has, if he gets a choice, is, you know, he's waited for a long time to get a job like Newcastle, where they have a chance to grow and maybe compete at the highest level. But then finding out that, you know, the people in charge aren't looking to do a Man City next week, shall we say. They're going to take the time and it's going to be steady. Now, Eddie Howe's been around long enough to know that football management, particularly club level, you're out the door before you know it. And so the fact that the question was, do you do the Newcastle thing or do you take the England job when it comes along? I've changed my mind. I think he takes it. He should take the England job.
What's the feeling back in England, Gab, about who will take it and where Eddie Howe stands on that list? Is there a feeling that it could be him?
I mean, he's certainly in the mix, right? Once you decide that you wanna go with an English manager, and there's lots of reasons to, you know, especially when you're England and you're, you know, you invented the game along with Scotland. You want to have an English manager. You've tried foreign managers before. It didn't quite work out. Then
it's been kind.
I'm sorry?
You saved it by mentioning Scotland.
Yeah.
I said you were just being kind.
Yep.
But look, I think it's very much 50-50, and my Scottish relatives would be, on Mrs. M's side, would be very upset if I didn't mention them. But look, the bottom line is there's a limited pool, and Eddie Howe is going to be in the mix. It's true that they had a ton of injuries last year. And by the way, Shaka being very much as a goalkeeper, when he mentions example of the injuries, he just mentions Nick Pope. Sure, that was a big loss, but they had a ton of others, you know, from Sven Botman to Harvey Barnes. And I feel like everybody was out at some point or another. But sure, Shaka mentioned the goalkeeper. He is one of many who was injured. I do think, though, when he looks ahead, and by the way, it's not just like the PIF, the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, their foreign investment arm. They treat these investments as a business. It's a little bit different than when they invest, you know, back home in Saudi, as we've seen with the Saudi Pro League and whatnot. You know, there are profit and sustainability rules. They want to turn Newcastle into a sustainable club, and so, you know, they're not going to go and just chuck money at it, as we said. And I think those are good circumstances in which to grow. Mitchell as well, very much a guy who built his rep on promoting younger players and maybe undervalued players, and that's how they want to grow. So I agree with Stevie. You know, maybe if you're Eddie Howe, you're saying, well, do I want to wait around for that, or do I want to take a shot at winning the World Cup? You know, not forgetting that I'd be taking over a team that, you know, reached what, 2 major European finals and a quarterfinal and a semifinal in the last 4 major tournaments. That is some pool of talent that you'd be taking over as England manager. And I think in some ways, while there might be some reservations over Eddie Howe, you know, he's not warm and fuzzy the way Gareth Southgate was. Maybe not quite as good with the media the way Gareth Southgate was. Maybe not as good a man manager as Southgate. In other areas, many people may well feel that Howe is superior. And, you know, unlike Graham Potter, Howe isn't tainted, you know, by the perception of having failed miserably in his last job.
Okay, so there's a lot to look out for with Newcastle this season. Mm-hmm. A lot of goings on with the backroom staff, as we have just laid out.
Huh? That's all that matters, Steve. I thought we established that.
That is all that matters, the goalkeepers union there.